Okay, well, numbers have plateaued out. Let's get started. Welcome again to, I don't know, the February edition of Patch Tuesday Support Group. We thanks for taking the time out to spend with us and talk about patching and nerd things. You may notice that Jordan is missing from us today. I don't know actually where he is. He's not here today. That's what I know. And so Jake has, as you can see, prepared very heavily for his role. Yep, it's right there on the forehead. He's going to bring us the security news regarding this month's patches. Then I'm going to give you more general news, and then we're also joined by our colleague David Stewart. He is ex-Microsoft and had his hands all the way up in SCUP, which we're going to talk about. So we'll end there, and Andrew is for the day taking over Jake's normal role of monitoring the chat. So if you have good questions or just general trolling, his job is to interrupt us with said trolling. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Jake, what do you got for us?
All right, like I said, Bryan said, I'm going to be filling in Jordan's shoes. Hopefully this won't be an absolute train wreck, but hey, everyone's along for the ride. To start us off, when it comes to the world of Microsoft, there were 80 unique CVEs this month. 5 were critical, 66 were important, 3 moderate, and 6 not applicable. Why there are not applicable ones, I couldn't tell you. I find it just an interesting tidbit there. When it comes down to the breakdown there, 31 of those were remote code execution vulnerabilities, 16 elevation of privileges, 10 spoofing, 5 information disclosures, and 3 security feature bypasses. Now, as far as patch notes are concerned, I'm going to be dropping some KB articles in the chat here. This KB number 5035606. Basically, at the end of the day, stop running Exchange. And if you are, please go patch it. Basically, what happened here is prior to the Exchange Server 2019 cumulative update 14, so CU 14, Exchange Server did not enable NTLM credential relay protections by default. Without that protection enabled, an attacker could target Exchange Server to relay leaked NTLM credentials from other targets. So imagine, as an example, like to Outlook. So not a great thing. But the latest patch for that does enable that by default or turn on EPA or extended protection for authentication. The next set of KBs is all.
And before you go on,
Brian.
That's actually what Jake just talked about with Outlook, or sorry, I said Outlook, but Exchange. Last month we talked about there was this beautiful article about people still running like Exchange 2013 that's like completely end of life. And so absolutely patch Exchange or don't run it online. And you'll see the first 2 news articles I have. We'll go into depth into why you don't want to do this.
Beautiful. Next ones, don't want to double paste those. The next 5 KBs here are all in relation to Office, specifically Outlook. I'm going to grab a link for this. This also has some directions on how to remediate. But at the end of the day, these particular vulnerabilities was a vulnerability in the preview pane for Outlook. And it really makes you question, maybe we should stop using email too. Like we're already going to get rid of on-prem Exchange. Why not just get rid of all of it altogether? Going to go back to using telegrams or something along those lines. Now, the other one that's kind of interesting, I know we talked about it last time, but that was in regards to WinRE. Here's the KB article for that as well. Also going to drop a KB article for remediations there. Once again, this is just an issue during an update where if your recovery partition wasn't big enough, there were some issues with getting the update going. I know we talked about that in the previous webinar, but again, throwing that one out there just so that everyone's aware, because I know that there are still some issues or complications with getting that patched in several environments.
Yeah. Actually, since Jake, since you brought it up, and as you can see, we don't pre-plan these at all. I actually had a note to talk about this briefly, so I might as well do it now. Which is like last month they released an update. So there's a BitLocker vulnerability that is only vulnerable, or sorry, that relies on the Windows recovery system, right? Like in order to exploit it, you need to get into the Windows recovery. So in order to fix it, they need to update the Windows recovery, which means that partition. And there's been a bunch of issues with that, specifically with size. And so we spent a lot of time talking about it in our last webinar about this, and you can go back and look at that. All of that's still relevant. What we were kind of hoping to see is that in this month, Microsoft would like magically fix it, right? Like how do we fix this? And so I recently asked some of the people I know, and the answer is no. Like, nobody should be waiting with bated breath for a release this month or next one or even the month after for some magical fix for this. In fact, they've actually gone backwards. What we got clarification on is that it hasn't been released through to the catalog, so you can't download it manually. It hasn't been released to WSUS, which means it doesn't show up in Config Manager, but it was in Windows Update. So if you're using Windows Update for Business or just using GPOs on your servers, it showed up. They've, in theory, fixed that too. So they've literally stopped deploying this thing via Windows Update. So in theory, and this is what I'm trying to get clarification on yet, there's actually no way to install this thing today, or at least they shouldn't be, unless you manage to download it some other way. And yet the vulnerability still exists. So that's what I'm trying to press them on, which is, so it's literally in not the catalog. It shouldn't be in WSUS. They've stopped deploying it via Windows Update, the cloud service. So if you're worried about the vulnerability, and rightfully so, I legitimately don't know what you do. But what I would tell you is nobody should be waiting for this month's patches or next month's patches to magically fix it. If it's a problem for you, you're going to have to do some of the janky stuff they wanted you to fix your partition size.
And I know there's a bunch of different blog posts out there already on like how to do that. Yeah. So there's definitely some Googling that'll be involved most likely there. But anything else there, Brian, or you want me to keep chugging along the train?
I'm done crafting.
Beautiful. Awesome. So that's it for Microsoft side of things. Now we're jumping over onto the third-party updates, at least from the Patch My PC perspective. So this month we released 2,359. Once again, 2,359 updates. Those updates specifically helped address 299 unique CVEs. And again, for breakdown as far as that's concerned, we're looking at 56 on the critical side, 1,879 on the moderate, 347 important, and 10 not applicable. Pretty crazy numbers there. When it comes to browsers, everybody's favorite thing, there were 18 patches for Google Chrome, 10 for the English version of Firefox, 21 for Edge, and 14 for Opera. I still would love to see a demographic of the people that are actually using Opera versus none of the other three, but interesting to see there. Other than that, when it comes to third-party, vulnerabilities, I mean, we could sit here and pick on some people, but we're not going to. There was a fun one though with AnyDesk. I am going to drop a link for the incident response there. Basically, as a result of the vulnerability, they had to re-release their binaries with a new signing certificate. But other than that, that's just all I've got, Brian. I'll hand it back over to you.
Oh man, this goes much
faster
quicker
than Jordan, I think.
But... Yeah, absolutely. You are totally nailing this on the speed, and for that I thank you. Okay, well, thanks, Jacob. Thanks for pitch hitting there for Jordan. I'm going to go ahead and share a window if I can do that successfully, which is some interesting things I've collected over the last month or so. Right off the bat, this gets to some of the stuff Jacob was talking about regarding Exchange. Microsoft even, and I guess this even applies to Exchange Online. So this is a real fun one. Somebody will put the link into the chat here. But Microsoft actually got popped by basically Russia. And what's interesting here, and if you read it, is how they got popped, which is that they had a non-production instance of Exchange or something, and yet they were able to elevate from that instance over into production, and they actually, in a targeted manner, as I understood it, were able to gain access to Microsoft mailboxes. So, it's not like a full-blown what's the right word? It's not like they owned the environment or anything, but they definitely got access to certain people's mailboxes, and I can only kind of imagine who they would go after. So that could be interesting to see in the coming months, just to see what actually get released. Because if I were to try and attack Microsoft's mailboxes, I'd probably go after Satya and some other fun, exciting things. And then basically, be out of that, because Microsoft was attacked, they're like, well, we know what we're looking for, and so there's some fallout from there as well. So Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Now remember that Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is like the server division that got split off years ago. So it's not the laptops and desktops we tend to think of, but they also got popped, and it's basically the same thing by the same people doing the same stuff. But again, they're, so I guess we go from don't run Exchange on-prem to, well, I guess running it on in the internet isn't all that great either. This next one also came around, was making a bunch of waves, the mother of all breaches, and it ended up, I wouldn't say being a nothing burger, but as time developed, we came to understand that's really just what somebody did is took a whole bunch of different leaks and combined all the data together, which doesn't sound, it's like, okay, well, whoop-de freaking do, that's not a big, like, who cares? It's actually kind of important because it makes it really, really easy for them to compare across different breaches. They're going to very quickly know who's using the same password, even if they don't have the password itself, right? Like, but who's using, if you can do hash validation, who's using the same credentials on different services, and those are ones that they're going to hone in on and start to go after. So again, it's not like it's news, and only that somebody combined a bunch of previous data exfiltration into one big massive thing that you can apparently now download in a much more open manner than before. This last one is also interesting. This comes out with this is this month's, and this is not something that I think everyone needs to be super freaked out about, but again, very kind of nation state actors going after very specific things. And what they were exploiting is exactly that, right? It's a flaw in Defender SmartScreen Zero-Day. So that's basically the thing that Defender uses to try and block malicious files that you open. So they were creating a URL to a URL shortcut, and you had to get the user, you had to social engineer the person into downloading it and running it. But of course, there's some, again, this is a very long article if you're interested in these things. And I didn't even fully understand what they were doing, but they had some complex ways of trying to get you to think that you downloaded an image file, but it was really a shortcut to a shortcut that then downloads some real awful stuff. And they were going after specifically traders. So some stock trading companies. Moving away out of security, okay, what happened? What's new? ConfigMgr is still alive and kicking. We did see a new technical preview come out in 2401. There's some interesting things in there. They have a new software update remediation dashboard, which is interesting, and I haven't had a whole lot of time to play with it. But okay, I mean, I'm just surprised that they're still creating dashboards at all. Super interesting, I think, to me, is like this idea you could search the entire console now. You would always have to be like, oh, I want to go search for a piece of software. And it's like, okay, well, you have to figure out, the right node to go down and get into the Wunderbar is what they call the thing in the bottom left. I literally had to look up the docs one day. The bottom left, assets, compliance, software library, those are the Wunderbar. You'd have to get there to search for it. And now you can just search the whole dang thing, which I think is actually, I mean, it's, I don't know. It in my small org, it wasn't terrible. But that's just it's a TP lab. So honestly, I don't think we'll really know until you get it into production. But it's probably faster than going to look for it, like having to go there and then search. At least I hope. Two other things to know: that HTTP only is being deprecated. So you have to go with either HTTPS, which usually requires PKI, or the enhanced HTTP, which does not require your own internal PKI. So just realize that that's what this technical preview, but that also probably means that the next release in 2403, which is what we would expect, that you would need to move there as well. What they have said is that the 2403 release will require all your CMGs to be redeployed or deployed to a VM scale set. That's kind of a, let's see if it's actually shown here. Yep, there you go. So for those who don't know, the initial release of a cloud management gateway, the way that they did that was on some legacy Azure thing, and that's what they call Classic, and they're trying to move you to the new thing, which is VM scale sets. And it's hitherto it has worked. You haven't been forced to move, but what they're telling you is you will be in the 2403. So they put some of that into the 2309 release as well. They've changed that process. So again, if you have a CMG and you're using Config Manager, I would probably go look at the 2309 release notes, and they're trying to walk and they talk about the process for how you would move from the Classic to a Azure VM scale set, and you will want to do that in prep for your 2403 upgrade. What's new in Intune? There's a bunch of interesting things here. The macOS size limits in general have improved. Where did I get this? I don't know that I'm at my actual link. So macOS limits are up to 8 gigs by default. And if you scroll down here, earlier they had lifted up the defaults of Win32 apps to 30 gigs. So in the past, Jake, do you remember what the default was? Like, what was the initial default? It was 8. Okay. And so macOS are still at 8, but by default, everyone should now have a default of 30 gigabytes for their Win32 apps. One of our friends, David Mabane, he releases, I don't see any docs on this, but you can now, in the drivers and firmware update service, you used to have to approve or pause or decline individual drivers, and now you can take those bulk actions. For anyone who's been playing with that, and it's a thing I've talked about at conferences and things, this is Microsoft's driver and firmware management solution within Intune. You can do bulk editing, which is nice. Microsoft released 2 things this February. The first one is Intune Advanced Analytics. So this is their foray into, I guess, better and deeper reporting. This is part of you can buy this standalone, or it's part of the Intune suite. The big thing that people are going to, I think, be interested in here is this run on-demand device queries on a single device. If you are familiar with Config Manager's CM Pivot, that's basically what this is. I mean, you could literally call it Intune Pivot. Right now, it only works on a single device. I'm sure that will broaden in subsequent releases, but that's the big thing. People are definitely, one of the things people are interested in, and you will find that under Advanced Analytics, which again is part of the Intune suite or standalone. The bigger one that people have asked us about, quite understandably, is Microsoft's Enterprise App Management, because that's also what they released. So this is Microsoft's latest attempt, I would say, at solving the third-party patching problem or third-party app management problem. And it is, so I took a hot second not last Friday, but 2 Fridays ago, and wrote this blog. Now that it's released, we can actually get our hands on it and see what's in there. And at the bottom, we obviously have a comparison to our own product. The TLDR, I would say, is that Microsoft is really selling you pre-populating the Windows Win32 app wizard. Like that's like the one sentence thing. So you don't have to go find the metadata, but you still have to go manually create the application. You still have to manually deploy that application. There will be a pane that will, like an actual pane within Intune that will show up that will tell you that you have that there are updated versions of the apps that you can deploy. But that doesn't automatically happen. You have to actually go and manually do those, and you get to run through the wizard again. You have to run through the wizard, through all the metadata, create the app, wait for the app to get uploaded, and then go manually deploy it. It's all very, very manual. The other thing that we looked at that and we talk about. So in this blog, I actually went through and looked at what's in the catalog. That's a big kind of question, like, hey, what's in the catalog? And so we went and did that. I will warn you that, or caution that this is what they came out with as of release. I know they plan on making this much larger. This list will be therefore outdated, I'm sure, very soon. But the other thing I did is looked at what versions of the apps are in here. And to be, I don't know how to say this any other way, that it's kind of frightening. When they released on February 1st, they had stuff that was already outdated in the catalog, and in fact still isn't updated, at least when I checked earlier, a couple of days ago. It is taking them clearly weeks or months to update applications in the catalog. So again, a full write down on those here on this blog if you're interested. We obviously got a lot of questions about it when it came out. Yes, this is obviously on some level a competitor, but we also sort of feel pretty strong about what our offering provides. Moving along. This is interesting. This is super niche, but this is like super nerdy for me, so I'm interested in it. If you are expediting updates within Intune, you're doing so based on the Windows Update for Business Deployment service. And in the past, when people have done so, they've been caught off guard by the fact that, security came down and said, hey, we need to blast this patch out right bloody now. We're not going to do any testing. And so you go do it in expedite, and then, for the most part, it works. It might take longer than you thought it did, but you're going to have some stubborn devices, and you're like, why? You're basically actually trying to find out why. And that's what the team has tried to go and are starting to solve. That when you create a expedite deployment, they're going to actually give you some reporting on, well, why wasn't this device able to install this expedited update? And the reasons are generally there's a bunch of configuration that has to happen. The Intune management extension, the IME needs, not the IME. There's an actual MSI that needs to get installed for expedite to work. So there's a whole bunch of links in the chain to get a device to actually install an expedited update, and they're going to give you some reporting and tell you why this device didn't. And it's good. I encourage anyone who's interested in expediting updates to go do one now. Go expedite the oldest update you can, because that's going to lay the groundwork for making sure that the time when you actually really need to do an expedited deployment, that everything's ready and set up to go. This is is an interesting one. It caught me off guard. Is that Microsoft has actually told us this for quite some time, but if you use the WMIC command line utility, that is being deprecated. And in fact, where it caught my attention is because it's actually removed from the canary builds of Windows 11, like WMIC.exe.com simply isn't there. It's been a feature on demand for a while, and it's been by default installed. And I think you can go reinstall it, but just be aware, who is this going to catch? I mean, if you built most of us would be doing this as PowerShell, and you wouldn't have to rely on WMIC to do it. But if you have any automation built on WMIC.exe, you are going to want to go fix that and rebuild that, because it will stop working relatively soon. The last few things we get into really this last one is kind of speculative. This was kind of an accident. One of the reasons that people do stay on-prem, or why for Exchange, or why they might have Exchange online, but then they have to go engage somebody like MailChimp or whatever the other vendors are in the market, is you can't really send bulk email from Exchange Online. And this showed up in somebody's, somebody simply saw this in their tenant, which was in theory an accident. But it indicates that Microsoft is interested in going after that problem. So if anyone's doing bulk, has a company that's doing bulk emailing, this might be an interesting thing to keep your eye on. There were a couple of people I saw that were able to figure out the Graph API calls to make it all work, and did some testing, and then Microsoft killed it. But again, it's speculative, but it's interesting to see. Again, Jake preempted me on this one, which is perfectly fine. We were going to talk about the WinRE environment stuff from last month. Again, the TLDR on this is if you were hoping for Microsoft to fix it and make this easier for you, sorry. That is simply not happening. We are on the cusp of releasing custom applications. We've been talking about that for a while. We are in private are we in public preview at this point?
Public preview.
Yeah, we're in public preview. We've been so for a while, and we have a webinar that I thought was already on the books, but we have a webinar coming up real soon where we will talk about, and I think the plan is to hopefully GA that. So I think Corey has there you go. I think Corey might have got us a link there. But with that, I am done. Were there any questions there, Andrew, we should talk about, or
a lot of people are asking for a link from Microsoft saying that they removed that one update for the WinRE.
Yeah,
they said they want the receipts.
I think we're waiting for that link too, right, Brian?
Well, yeah. I mean, so the only thing then, like the only receipt you will get is is the KB article, right? The KB article probably needs to be updated to say it's not released via Windows Update. And again, the KB article says that it's not in WSUS and that it's not in the catalog. And those are two things I can generally say we confirmed last month. I mean, we had ConfigMgr and manager like, wait a minute, where is this thing? Why don't I see KB, whatever it is, 4 or 11 or I think it ends in. And that I think we have the receipts, and the KB shows that. The KB still shows that it is deployed at Windows Update, which is true. I have been told it's been throttled to 0%, but I haven't myself improved that. So no, I don't have receipts for you. If anybody sees it still being deployed on a new box, I'd be interested. Do know though that those fixes were included in the cumulative update for Windows 11. So your Windows 11 devices, like nothing changes for Windows 11. Although for most Windows 11, I don't think we had a lot of the partitioning issues we had, just because Microsoft had updated the default partition table. But if you have Windows 11 devices, nothing has changed. And really the concerning thing to me there is that the vulnerability still exists, right? Like the vulnerability didn't go away, but they are unreleasing a patch. That just sounds somewhat concerning. I don't know what people are going to do. But the only receipts I would expect from Microsoft, like officially, will be on the KB. Like, does the KB say that it is not in Windows Update? But that would be interesting, that would be a first for me to have a KB where like, how do you get this update is like, no. Like, is it in Woo? No. Is it in WSUS? No. Is it in the catalog? Also no. So yeah, I agree. No deets unless somebody provided anything in the chat.
One of the guys in the chat did say that the KB was available set to yes for Windows Update on the website. So maybe that's changed, but yeah.
No. That's what we've seen. So that's unchanged, right? If you go to the KB,
gotcha.
Right? And let's see if I have it in here and I can link it again, or somebody can. That it was in Woo, which is the cloud, not in WSUS, not in catalog, and that hasn't changed. But I have been told by some people who should know that they are throttling that back, that they are not delivering that update because of the issues it calls. But people were hoping that they would somehow either fix the space issue, because there are solutions there, or that they would re-release it, let's say, to not show as applicable if there's no WinRE partition, especially on servers, right? VMs, if you just never created the recovery partition because you just weren't ever going to do it, the current version of this update will still think it's applicable and still try to install and fail. Now, there is no vulnerability. If you don't have a Windows RE partition, you're not vulnerable. And they did update the KBs to state that. There's a little note that says, hey, if you don't have a WinRE partition, you're not vulnerable. But if you ever if anybody has security auditing, they are going to tell you that you have this, I fully expect that someone's running a Qualys scan, and I don't want to pick on Qualys, like other scans as well, are going to say like, hey, you need this update installed, and it's not installed. And they're going to get dinged for it, and they're going to have to explain that, well, it's not actually vulnerable. I'm not vulnerable because we don't have this thing. And it's true, but it's always a complex, difficult conversation sometimes to have with security. It's like, yeah, but we're not vulnerable because of this extending circumstances. And
they need to be patched regardless, Brian.
Yeah.
I know. That's
Anything else, Andrew? Anything else, Andrew?
Nothing else really came up. It was very much the WinRE. And then some questions about custom apps, which we've happily answered in the chat, and we will answer a million questions on the webinar.
Yep.
Save those questions up and bring them to the webinar.
It's actually, it's apropos because Dave Stew, who's joined us, and you can come off mute, Dave, has sort of been the shepherd behind that whole effort. Dave Stewart comes from us from Microsoft, and he would like it said that he does not speak for Microsoft. He's no longer there. He can't speak for the current team, but he spent, I don't know, how long were you there, Dave?
Oh, I worked at Microsoft a long time, about 25 years. So.
Okay. And where did you start in? Like, what was your first?
I started off on Config Manager 1.2, SMS
Really?
1.2. Yep.
Okay.
Supporting SMS 1.2, all the way up through current branch when I left Microsoft in late 2022. So.
Okay. Awesome. And I guess I forgot to lay the groundwork here that this should have been in my news, that System Update Publisher, for those who don't know, was deprecated on January 31st, 2024. So anyone who is using SCUP, System Center Update Publisher, whether that's with our tools or anyone else, just know that tool is deprecated. David Stewart, or as we call him here, Dav Stew, I don't know. Explain
I worked on SCUP. I worked on SCUP a lot.
But
I worked on SCUP. Let's see. Originally, actually, SCUP started off as custom updates publishing tool for back in SMS 2003. As that's back when maybe some folks on the call remember ITMU, before we had WSUS integration with Config Manager. And so we had an ITMU, and then there was an ITDU, and then there was an ITCU, which was custom updates. So that's all, a long time ago now, but that's where it originated as a way for third-party updates to be available for Config Manager customers. And then it evolved over time.
So just give us a hot second. Like, what is SCUP? Like, you just gave a bunch of acronyms. So.
Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, so Updates Publisher is basically a desktop app you download. I just tested. I put in the chat. The link's actually still working, even though it's deprecated. And you can use this tool to author your own updates for Configuration Manager. It's an XML authoring tool, but it's also how you can pull in catalogs and publish those into Config Manager. Some folks may have been using it for the HP catalog, the Lenovo catalog, for example. And then in 1806 version of Config Manager, they actually, Microsoft started putting in features into Configuration Manager console itself to import catalogs, but there's no authoring. You can't create your own updates in the console. Right.
So maybe you don't want to answer this, but I'll ask it anyways. And I'm going off script already. So question number 2, like, did you work closely with like HP and like Dell, like to get that catalog? Like, was there, like, I know Adobe's the other one, like did you work with those orgs, or was this really, because the way that DJM has kind of explained it to me, he's like, well, we built this thing hoping they would come, right? Like, so like what if any relationship was there between the people that built those catalogs?
So the problem with custom updates and third-party support from Microsoft is always getting, Microsoft didn't want to get into the business of creating the content. Microsoft didn't want to curate the actual third-party updates, right? So the trick for building that third-party ecosystem was to build the tool kit. We're going to do if you build it, they will come. Customers wanted third-party updates, so then we had reach out programs and partner programs where we reach out to our contacts at these OEMs. It's interesting because it gets into a discussion about whether or not third-party drivers would be supported. So what happened is the OEMs all decided to create third-party drivers as apps, right? And then you could update those apps, and that let them sort of deploy drivers via software updates management. And so that's where these catalogs originate from. So yeah, we had to work with them quite a bit. And early on, those catalogs were pretty small. And that was a big driver around some of the re-releases and rewrites of SCUP that took place over the years, was the performance problems that started to come up as those catalogs started to grow and customers started to rely on those more and more. So that's where sort of that last version of SCUP originated, was there was a lot of performance problems in the earlier versions, especially with some of those catalogs getting to be, 3,000 to 5,000 updates.
I think even more than that. Like I think our support engineers at Patch My PC have often seen WSUS instances that have had every Dell and HP driver loaded in, and that usually goes poorly.
Why is my machine eval going slow? Well, there's 36,000 Dell drivers that are scanning for applicability. What could go wrong?
You should take a look if you want to get a good laugh. Open up the updates publisher, click through the detection logic on some of those updates, and you'll see some of those. They might have
14 WMI queries on a lot of the Dell drivers. Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, those queries are expensive to run too, and it has to run it for every single update when you do a scan. So there's a lot of performance things. We added a bunch of features over time, but sometimes getting our partners who do those catalogs to adopt those new features to optimize that detection logic was a heavy lift, right? So it's expensive for those folks to maintain their catalogs, and they have thousands of updates to deal with. But there are things there that they could do to improve, but there's still a lot of room for them to do better.
Would you say that, was it Dell, HP, Lenovo that kind of inspired you guys to make the tool, or was it community feedback, or was there any other reason behind it?
No, I mean, it was just community. Customers wanted third-party update management, because they had first-party update management from Microsoft. So there was just a community ask, that we do something for third-party updates. The whole OEM thing and the drivers, that was not the original intent. What happened is it was really for, the Adobe case, or, 7-zip or whatever. And then later, when there's always been this problem with third-party drivers too, right? And so when all the OEMs went to XE-based and MSI-based installers, that actually worked out that it would work on that tech stack that we built for application updates. Right. So they started repackaging everything as applications, and that's why these catalogs grew so much, is because they're firmware and driver updates, hidden inside of application updates, right? But the toolchain never was intended to be a driver platform. It was an application. Applications and line of business, right? So this is why we had authoring, right, in there. The update tool itself would let you author these updates. So folks who had line of business apps and wanted to use the software update stack that's in Configuration Manager to deploy them in a consistent way with first-party updates, they could use the SCUP tool to author those.
Right. And you said something there real quick, right? High level, you're saying, hey, we're hoping that apps would, the idea we're trying to solve the Adobe and the 7-zip problem. And my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is just the idea was that you're lowering the barrier to entry for enterprise app delivery, right? It's okay, great. You made an app. You've hopefully made a decent installer, which is all of us know that's a huge hurdle itself. But now, in theory, all you needed to do is write this little XML file, shove it in CAB, and sign it. If you could write text, you could make it super easy to deploy in the whole enterprise, and very few people.
Yeah, that was always the problem.
Right.
Yeah, that was always the problem, is getting all these different vendors. We made the updates publisher. We made a nice GUI, so you didn't even have to write your own XML. You didn't even have to know how to do a text file. You could literally just click through a few wizards in the updates publisher. Right. And we thought, hey, how much easier can we get it? Our customers will also provide feedback to their software vendors that they should have a catalog. And a couple of them did, right? Adobe did do a catalog early on. And
they still do. They have multiple.
Yeah. Yep. And and so some got some traction there, but it was interesting that it went totally sideways, and the OEMs became the biggest catalog providers, because even as easy as we tried to make that, it was really difficult to get every single software vendor to start doing this. And of course, here we are today, right? Now they still haven't really done it, right? And companies like Patch My PC have stepped in to fill that need. Yep.
Beautiful. So, like with your old team, roughly how big was it when you guys first started?
So it was a really big team at first. For the ITCU back in the SMS 2003 days, there was actually, there's dependencies on WSUS. Even though that ITCU tool didn't have WSUS dependencies, that schema is what turned into the local publishing schema, and the SDP schema, as some people might call it. So there was already work going in to how that would work when WSUS integration became a thing in SMS 2007. So that was a pretty sizable cross-team effort, right, with WSUS, Config Manager. But the ITCU piece was also, there was no Windows Update agent to do the scan for that catalog. So there was actually a scan agent. And I mentioned ITDU and ITMU. That was an inventory tool for Microsoft updates, and inventory tool for Dell updates. And each of these scanners were, deployed to endpoints, right? So you actually had multiple scan agents deployed to endpoints. We used inventory to get data back. There was a lot of latency and things like that. So there was sort of a quantum leap to SMS 2007 when we did WSUS integration. But as part of that WSUS integration, it didn't fully have third-party updates were not as high a priority for Microsoft as first-party updates in that integration. But we kept, moving along with SCUP, and SCUP used the local publishing APIs. So the updates publisher is actually more tightly integrated with WSUS than it is with Configuration Manager, but Configuration Manager is integrated obviously with WSUS. So anyway, the team started off pretty large, maybe 5 or 6 people working on that first version, and then another set of people working on the scan agent. So it was sort of 2 pieces. But over time, in the last release, it actually got pretty small. We just had myself and one other developer work on the latest version of SCUP. And then a couple of folks helped with testing, and of course we had PM and things like that. So it got pretty small. And I think that last iteration was maybe about a 6-month project. It was not originally going to be a 6-month project. It turned into a 6-month project because we ended up rewriting the entire thing. And it was just a port of the old the prior version to the latest tech stack. And then around the time we were getting ready to ship that version of Updates Publisher, we knew we wanted to get something into the console as well. So that's where I don't know how many SDP nerds are here, but that's where the idea of V2 and V3 catalogs came from. The V2 was mainly about performance and how long it would take to download those catalogs and delta detection on those downloads. And then V3 was all about being able to support certificates included in the catalog and approval processes that could work with Configuration Manager. And so we always wanted to have these catalogs work both with Config Manager and with people who were using the SCUP tool, because we knew when in the 1806, which was the first shot of in-console publishing, that it didn't have parity, right? So customers in that version, Brian, you talked about, right? If you click the Dell catalog, you got the Dell catalog, all of it.
Yeah, I know. It was...
Yeah. So that could cause performance problems on scanning because of the rules we talked about. And as a result, people still used the Updates Publisher because you could go in there and you could select just the things that you actually cared about in your environment. So that's where all that later stuff came.
For my entire time within Config Manager before 1806, it was always super highly ranked. Why isn't SCUP in the console, right? So, and I legit don't know. That's a design choice, right? Is it just because the console didn't exist at the? No, yeah. Why was it built separately in the first place?
Well, so it started off as a standalone tool because nothing was built. There was no, even Microsoft updates weren't really built into the console in 2003, right? So it sort of started off there. And of course, first party updates were the focus, right? And then the fact that there's a whole bunch of reasons, right? A lot of them are around, how much it would effort it would take and capacity and complexity. You know, the
Okay.
Config Manager console itself is a pretty complicated thing. It's not just a desktop app. It connects to the provider, and then the provider connects to the database. So there's a complex security model there. And then, you know, if you know about replication and Configuration Manager, can you imagine having to replicate every single modification to every single Dell update in addition to what we already do for first-party updates, right? So it added more onto the stack from there. And just the cost to implement it and ship it at the same time and align to the shipping schedule for Configuration Manager. If you remember, before current branch, that shipping schedule wasn't very frequent, right?
It was 4 years.
And we didn't want to
Right.
wait to be able to get, you know, improvements out, right? So this is why it was sort of a separate thing, which meant you couldn't really put it in the console, right?
Right.
And, you know, if you look at what did happen with 1806, sort of one of the interesting things that we didn't think of early on that in hindsight maybe we would have changed is the authoring, the fact that the updates publisher is an authoring tool and an importing tool and a synchronizing tool gives it sort of an identity crisis. It makes the tool sort of hard to use, you know, for the most common case, which is I just want to pull down a catalog of updates and deploy those updates and find, you know, what systems in my environment need those updates and get them patched, right?
Right. And that's ultimately why, like, when they put it in the console, they focused on just, I mean, that's the happy path for most people. And I've talked to the team that, you know, made the call to deprecate this thing, and that's part of it. They're like, well, all the things people really use SCUP for, anyways, are in their minds in the console. You asked me this question though, and so I'm wondering if you could explain what's the difference between something being deprecated and end of life, because it seems like those seem like synonymous things, but my guess is there's some Microsoft parlance there. But
deprecation is the warning light, right? Hey, you know, try to remove your high dependencies on this thing, right?
Okay.
So I don't know what Microsoft's plans might be. Deprecation usually, you know, while I was there, we would try to give a good bit of notice to customers before we plan to stop disinvesting in some technology, so that they would have time. And of course, you don't want to deprecate something without there being another solution, right?
Right.
So we kind of knew with 1806, right, where we first started putting in console publishing that, you know, eventually it would get better, right? And it did need improvement because of that granularity thing that we talked about. And as it got better, you know, we got to the point where we thought, hey, you know, folks don't need the authoring capability, or at least not a lot of customers are using the authoring capability, right? They're more consuming catalogs. So this will probably be good enough, and we can maintain it with current branch shipping regularly, et cetera. So deprecation of SCUP was something that probably started getting discussed once current branch got, you know, V3 support and the way you can do categories and have granular controls over those catalogs. But even that, you know, we built that into Config Manager, but it took a while for the catalogs to actually onboard and support those things too. So it's kind of waiting for the ecosystem to be ready to say, hey, you know, there's something viable here. So maybe we don't need the, you know, the authoring capabilities of SCUP, and maybe this is good enough. And then there's always a cost, right? So if Microsoft wants to continue to support SCUP, they of course have to spend engineering cycles to, you know, update it, patch it to the latest things, maybe rewrite it again to the latest and greatest.net, et cetera, right? So those cost drivers are probably why it's currently deprecated. But what's interesting is deprecation, while we give notice, it doesn't necessarily give a drop dead date, right? It's just, hey, it's deprecated, you know, be careful and mindful before you take a high dependency on something. Like I said, I just during this meeting, I went and checked, and the download's actually still alive.
Yeah.
And I know they pulled the download. Even when I was there, and you know, up until late 2022, we would pull the download, or it got pulled at one point because we had marked it as deprecated on some internal thing, and then we got customer feedback. Hey, where's this at? Right, we're still using this, so we put it back, right? You know, because there's nothing that I know of, at least, that means that they need to pull it. It's working fine. Tool still works. There's no problem there. It's just you know, they don't want to support it or release new versions of it at this point. And I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, if they leave it in a deprecated state for longer than a year, right? It may stay that way for a while. That link may be there for a long time.
All right. Any parting thoughts? Any feelings about its deprecation, or is that just like, thank goodness that code dies?
No. While I was at Microsoft, I was one of the folks who wanted to keep it around, just because I knew customers were still using it. So I don't know how many customers. We never had good telemetry. SCUP doesn't have a telemetry system in it. So Microsoft, you know, is maybe flying a little bit blind as far as how many customers really need the features that are in SCUP. So, you know, even when people are still using it, it may be because they don't know that they have granular options inside of the in-console publishing feature. And you know, it's just a pattern. This is what we've been doing. It still works. Why change it, right? So
I'm interested to know how many people use SCUP that don't have Config Manager. How many standalone, which is a violation of the terms of service, but it's not a violation of the technical solution. So like,
technically it can work.
Thanks for joining us. We always enjoy doing these things. So a good time. Hope you had a good time and enjoy the rest of your week, and have a good weekend, everyone.